The day of the wedding dawned with an air of promise, the kind of morning that seemed made for beginnings. The sunlight poured through the lace curtains of my hotel room, throwing patterns onto the carpet where my shoes, still polished and waiting, stood in neat formation. Today, I was supposed to marry the woman I loved, Sophie, and for all intents and purposes, it should have been the happiest day of my life. But from the moment I opened my eyes, a gnawing feeling tugged at my chest. Something intangible, something I couldn't name, whispered in the back of my mind. I chalked it up to nerves. After all, who didn't feel nervous on their wedding day? The suite buzzed with activity. My best man, Thomas, was already dressed, pacing with the kind of energy that suggested he was more anxious than me. My younger cousin tried to lighten the mood by cracking jokes, while the groomsmen shuffled about, adjusting ties and cufflinks. It was the usual pre-wedding chaos, laughter, nerves, and the smell of cologne heavy in the air. Yet beneath it all, I kept feeling as though a shadow hung over the day. When I glanced at my reflection in the mirror, I expected to see a nervous but excited groom. Instead, my own eyes stared back with a question I couldn't answer. What if something went wrong? The thought seemed absurd, but the unease refused to leave me. The venue was a countryside estate Sophie had chosen for its sweeping gardens and charming stone chapel. By the time we arrived, the place looked like something pulled out of a fairy tale. Rows of chairs lined the garden, white flowers wrapped around the arch where we would exchange vows, and sunlight gleamed off the polished wood of the chapel doors. Guests filtered in, dressed in their finest, their chatter filling the air like a rising tide. I should have been smiling, greeting relatives and friends, soaking in the joy of the occasion. Instead, I noticed things, small things, that set my nerves on edge. My mother looked distracted, her hands fidgeting with her clutch. Sophie's father stood stiff near the back rows, his jaw clenched, speaking little to anyone. Even Sophie, radiant in her gown as she prepared in her dressing room, seemed uneasy. It wasn't the normal pre-wedding jitters. It was heavier, like everyone carried a secret they were afraid might slip out. Thomas clapped me on the shoulder. "Relax, mate," he said with a grin. "In a few hours, this'll all be over. You'll be married, and then the only thing you'll need to worry about is remembering anniversaries." I forced a laugh, but my chest felt tight. The ceremony began. The chapel filled with a swell of music as Sophie walked down the aisle, every step a vision of grace. The guests rose to their feet, their faces bright with admiration. My breath caught in my throat. She was stunning, and for a moment, the unease vanished. She reached me, her hand trembling slightly as it slipped into mine. I squeezed it reassuringly, whispering, "You look beautiful." Her smile was faint but fragile, as though it might shatter if I stared too long. The priest began speaking, his words weaving through the air like a spell meant to bind us together. I tried to focus, but the weight of the atmosphere pressed down on me. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the way Sophie avoided my eyes, in the way my mother wouldn't look directly at us, in the way Sophie's father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. And then it happened. When the priest reached the part, "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace," a silence stretched through the room like a blade. I expected the usual pause, the polite waiting, and then for the ceremony to continue. Instead, the silence deepened, became suffocating. And then, a voice broke it. "I can't let this happen." The words echoed across the chapel, chilling every bone in my body. It was Sophie's father. Gasps rippled through the guests, whispers breaking out like sparks in dry grass. Sophie froze beside me, her hand stiff in mine. Her father rose slowly, his face pale, his eyes haunted. He cleared his throat, his voice trembling but firm. "I'm sorry," he said, his gaze fixed not on me, but on Sophie. There's something you need to know before you go through with this. Sophie's lips parted, confusion flickering across her features. Dad, what are you? He shook his head. Not here. Not like this. But I can't watch you walk down this path without knowing the truth. The priest hesitated, glancing between us, unsure whether to continue. The guests murmured louder, the weight of curiosity pressing in from all sides. My heart hammered in my chest. Truth? What truth? I turned to Sophie, but her face had drained of color, as though she already knew what was coming. Dad, she whispered, please don't. Her father's jaw tightened. I have no choice. The ceremony collapsed into chaos. The priest could do nothing but step back as Sophie's father walked down the aisle toward us. Guests leaned forward, their faces wide-eyed, desperate for the drama to unfold. Sophie's mother buried her face in her hands, shaking her head in despair. He stopped a few feet away, staring directly at Sophie. His hands trembled as he pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. I promised your mother I'd never tell you, he said softly, but I can't stay silent anymore. Not when you're about to marry him. The room erupted into whispers. Marry him? My head spun. Sophie's breath hitched. Dad, stop. But he didn't. He extended the envelope toward her, his hand shaking. Read this. Please. You need to know who you really are. And just like that, the world seemed to tilt sideways. Guests leaned closer, the air in the chapel heavy with expectation. Sophie's trembling hands reached for the envelope, though she looked as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. My pulse raced, my mind screaming for answers, but all I could do was stand frozen, waiting for the words that would change everything. When Sophie finally tore open the envelope, the sound of ripping paper was deafening. She unfolded the letter inside, her eyes scanning the words, and with every line, her expression crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes. Her lips moved, forming silent words, as if she couldn't believe what she was reading. And then she dropped the paper to the floor. The entire chapel held its breath. What is it? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Sophie looked at me, and in that moment, I saw a truth so terrible it made my stomach turn. I can't marry you, she said, her voice breaking. The guests erupted into gasps and exclamations. The priest's mouth hung open. My world crashed around me. What do you mean? I asked, my voice sharp, desperate. Her father's shoulders slumped, his face etched with decades of regret. You have to understand, he said. The two of you, you're not supposed to be together. Because... He faltered, his words choking in his throat. Sophie shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. Don't say it. But the silence was unbearable. My chest ached with the weight of it, with the need to know. Because why? I demanded, my voice cracking. Her father looked at me, his eyes full of sorrow. Because your family. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The words couldn't have been real, couldn't have been spoken aloud in front of hundreds of guests, in the middle of my own wedding. Because your family. The chapel erupted. Gasps, murmurs, horrified whispers. Someone near the back let out a sharp laugh, as though they thought it was some cruel joke. But when I looked at Sophie's father, I saw no humor, only devastation. I felt the floor beneath me sway, as if the earth itself had given way. My head spun, and I tightened my grip on the pew beside me to keep from collapsing. Family? I repeated, my voice hoarse. What do you mean, family? Sophie sobbed, her hands clutching at her dress, her bouquet slipping to the floor. Please, please stop this, she whispered to her father, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. He finally turned to me, his voice grave, almost apologetic. You and Sophie, you share blood. You were never supposed to find each other this way. The words were like knives. The chapel blurred, voices muffled, as though I had been plunged underwater. My stomach churned violently. "That's impossible," I muttered, shaking my head. "That's no. My father, my family, your father," he interrupted, his tone heavy, "is also Sophie's." The words detonated like a bomb. Every face in the chapel turned toward me, their eyes filled with pity, curiosity, disbelief. Sophie's knees buckled, and I caught her instinctively, even as my own strength faltered. "No," I said again, but my voice had lost all conviction. "That can't be true. My father, he died when I was 12. He was nothing like—" Sophie's father cut me off with a raised hand. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I begged him to tell you, both of you, but he refused. He thought it was better if you never knew." The weight of his words crushed me. My father had known? He had kept this secret all these years, never once letting it slip. The chapel was suffocating. Guests whispered furiously among themselves, some looking away in shame, others staring openly, as though they couldn't look anywhere else. I turned to Sophie, desperate. "Is this true?" Her lips trembled. She didn't answer, but her silence said everything. The priest cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps this discussion could be moved to a more private." But Sophie's father shook his head. "No, it's too late for privacy. The truth is already out." The truth. That cursed word hung over us like a storm cloud. I felt my chest tighten, every breath a struggle. My mind screamed at me to deny it, to call it a lie, to shout that none of this could be real. But deep down, a part of me already knew. I thought back to all the times Sophie and I had marveled at our uncanny similarities, the same shade of brown in our eyes, the same stubborn streak when we argued, the way we both had a tiny scar on our left hands from childhood accidents. We had laughed it off as coincidence. Now it felt like cruel irony. Sophie's sobs broke through my thoughts. She covered her face, her body shaking with the weight of the revelation. Why didn't anyone tell us?" she cried. Her father's voice cracked. "Because your mother begged me not to. She wanted you to have a normal life, free from the mistakes of the past. We thought it would never come to this." I staggered backward, the world spinning around me. My entire life felt like a lie, unraveling before my eyes. Thomas, my best man, rushed forward, grabbing my arm. "Mate, breathe," he whispered urgently. "You're going pale. Sit down." But I shook him off. "Don't," I snapped, my voice breaking. "Don't tell me to sit down when everything I am, everything I thought I knew, has just been destroyed." The guests were murmuring louder now, some of them pulling out their phones despite the scandal unfolding. I caught sight of flashes, the glint of cameras, and rage burned in my chest. My life, my ruin, was becoming a spectacle. I clenched my fists. "You should have told us years ago," I spat at Sophie's father. "Not here. Not now. Do you realize what you've done?" His shoulders slumped. "I know," he said softly. "And I'll never forgive myself. But would you have listened? Would you have believed it before this moment?" I had no answer. Sophie turned toward me, her face streaked with tears, her voice trembling. "What do we do now?" I wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that nothing would change the love I felt for her, that I didn't care about blood, that our bond was deeper than any secret. But when I opened my mouth, the words refused to come. What kind of monster would that make me, to say such a thing now? I saw the desperation in her eyes, the same war raging inside her heart. She loved me. I loved her. But the world had shifted beneath our feet, and nothing was the same anymore. The priest closed the book in his hands, his face solemn. "This ceremony cannot continue," he said quietly, though the whole room heard it. "I am sorry. And just like that, our wedding, our future, was shattered. The aftermath was chaos. Guests filed out of the chapel in hushed shock, some shaking their heads, others whispering in disbelief. My mother avoided my gaze, her lips pressed tight, as though holding back her own confession. Sophie's mother clung to her husband's arm, her face pale and drawn. Thomas tried to guide me outside, but I pushed him away. I didn't want comfort. I wanted answers. Sophie collapsed onto a pew, her hands trembling as she clutched the letter her father had given her. The same letter that had started this nightmare. I approached slowly, every step feeling like a march toward execution. "Let me see it," I demanded, my voice rough. She hesitated, then handed it to me. Her eyes pleaded silently, "Don't read it. Don't make this worse." But I had to. The letter was written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. "My dearest Sophie," it began, "if you are reading this, then the truth I swore to keep has finally caught up to us. You are my child. Born of a mistake I will never stop regretting, but also a soul I have always loved from afar. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell him too. But life is cruel, and I feared the damage it would cause. Forgive me." I couldn't read further. My hand shook so violently the page nearly slipped from my grip. My chest constricted until I thought my ribs would snap. Sophie's soft sobs filled the silence between us. Everything I had believed about my father, about my family, had been shattered by these lines of ink. He had abandoned me with half the truth. He had abandoned her with half the truth. And now, both halves had collided into a nightmare neither of us could escape. "Burn it," Sophie whispered suddenly, her voice sharp. I looked at her, startled. "What?" "Burn the letter," she said again, more fiercely this time. "If no one else knows, then maybe we can still—" Her voice cracked, but she didn't finish. The implication was clear. If the letter disappeared, if the secret was erased, then maybe we could pretend. My heart twisted. I wanted that so desperately it hurt. To close my eyes, to rewind time, to stand again at the altar with none of this ever spoken. But the truth had already poisoned us. It lived in our blood, in the very marrow of our bones. Destroying the paper wouldn't destroy the reality. "No," I said finally, my voice breaking. "We can't pretend. Not anymore." Sophie's sob turned into a wail, echoing through the empty chapel. Outside, the sky had clouded over, as though the world itself mirrored the storm inside me. Reporters were already gathering beyond the gates, word of the scandal spreading like wildfire. Guests hurried to their cars, desperate to escape the shame of being witnesses to such a revelation. And I stood there, clutching the letter that had ruined my life, wondering how to take a single step forward. I had lost my bride. I had lost my father all over again. I had lost the future I had spent years building. And yet, deep in the wreckage of my heart, one thought refused to die. I still loved Sophie. The letter trembled in my hand as though it were alive, pulsing with the weight of my father's betrayal. I wanted to tear it to shreds, to scream, to run until my lungs collapsed. But instead, I stood frozen in that hollow chapel, the echo of Sophie's sobs reverberating through the walls. Outside, I could hear the hum of engines and the murmur of voices, reporters, no doubt, circling like vultures, ready to feast on the tragedy that had just unfolded. Our wedding, which should have been the happiest day of our lives, had turned into a public spectacle of disgrace. Sophie rose shakily to her feet. Her dress, once pristine, now clung to her like a burden. She wiped her eyes with trembling hands, but her tears kept coming. She looked at me, not as a bride looks at her groom, but as a sister looks at her brother for the very first time. That look shattered me more than any letter could. "We can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We can't be together. Not now. Not ever." Her words pierced me, but I couldn't argue. Deep inside, I knew she was right. The bond we shared, the love that had carried us to this day, was suddenly tainted, tangled in a truth too monstrous to ignore. But love doesn't vanish simply because it's forbidden. "I still love you," I said, my voice raw. "Nothing can erase that. Not even this." Her face crumpled. "Don't say that," she pleaded. "Don't make it harder than it already is." We left the chapel through separate doors. The air outside was thick with chaos. Flashes erupted, reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved in my face. "Is it true you're siblings? How long have you known? Will the wedding be annulled?" I couldn't breathe. Thomas fought to shield me, pushing people aside, yelling for space. But the questions stuck to me like knives. Each one cut deeper, leaving me raw, exposed. Sophie was rushed into a waiting car by her parents, her veil pulled down to hide her face. I caught one last glimpse of her before the door slammed shut, her eyes, wide with fear and heartbreak, staring at me as though begging me not to follow. And then she was gone. The days that followed blurred into one another. Every headline screamed our names. Every social feed overflowed with speculation, gossip, ridicule. Friends stopped calling. Colleagues whispered behind my back. My mother stayed locked in her room, refusing to speak to me, to anyone. I was alone. But worse than the isolation was the silence from Sophie. No calls. No messages. Nothing. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship, every laugh, every kiss, every promise we'd made under the illusion of a future we'd never have. I kept hearing my father's voice in the back of my mind. Not the man I had loved, but the liar who had kept this secret buried until it exploded, destroying us all. Sometimes I hated him so much I wanted to scream. Other times, I found myself begging him in my thoughts for guidance, for forgiveness, as though he could rise from the grave and fix the ruin he'd left behind. But the dead don't answer. It was nearly 2 weeks before Sophie reached out. The message came late at night, just one line. "Meet me at the lake." My heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst. The lake, the place where we'd had our first date, where I'd first kissed her under the moonlight, where I'd asked her to marry me. It was ours. I drove there without hesitation, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, my mind racing with every possibility. When I arrived, Sophie was already there, standing by the water's edge. The moonlight shimmered on the surface, casting her in silver light. She looked fragile, ethereal, like she didn't belong to this world anymore. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, filled only by the gentle lapping of the water. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes swollen from crying. "I can't sleep," she whispered. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the altar. I hear the words. I feel everything collapsing all over again." I swallowed hard. "Me too." She stepped closer, her dress brushing against the grass. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking. "I shouldn't say it, but I do. And I don't know how to stop." Her confession cut me open. I wanted to grab her, hold her, never let go. But instead, I clenched my fists at my sides, fighting against the pull. "We can't," I said hoarsely. "No matter how much we want to, we can't." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Then what do we do?"